My name is rmendis, Richard or Rich, and joined with me today. I'm really happy to have some amazing artisans that hopefully you guys all know and have met. Let's start with ladies first. Kate, also known as Blooper from Eclectics. She makes key locks, panels, amongst other awesome stuff. Robert, or also known as Binge from Underwood Studio, makes the otters, under keys. I'll just mention a couple. Joey, also known as Kudos, and his lovely wife is here as well, Koala, Kate.
Koala Tea!
Yeah. You guys may know them as Key Collective, but Gap is also very popular these days as a brand. And last but not least, Marcus, also known as, that should say, Eat the Food. And if you've been out to dinner with him, you'll know why he's called Eat the Food. From Nightcaps, maker of fugu, and many other things. So we'll go ahead and get started. So to kick things off, I thought we've seen a lot of great collaborations over the years. You guys have all collaborated with things. Kate and Joey, is this the first time you guys have met in person?
This is actually the first time we've met,
Yeah. So you guys are familiar with the...
Is that really true?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's always like we're gonna go to a meetup, she was coming, or like we were gonna go and we were gonna come, but like none of us ever got a chance to like.
So if you know, one of the greatest earlier collaborations was the Cosmos, which is based on the Cosmonaut by Kate, and then Kudos took it and encapsulated something. So maybe to start off with, if you guys can tell us what's the collaborative process like, how did it work remotely, and anything else you'd like to share about that.
Well, the collaborative process for that particular thing was mostly just like fucking they did bomb stuff with my stuff. I was like, can I help? And they're like, nah, dude.
We got it.
We fucking got it. And I was like, how do I encapsulate like you? It was amazing. It was like the most seamless, smooth experience.
Yeah, with Cosmo, it was, I mean, the sculpt in and of itself was perfect as it was. So there wasn't a lot we could do with it. We just add a little bit to it. I think it's different with every artist. Some artists like having a little bit more control. Some are a little more laid back. With Kate, she was just like, yeah, go for it, do it,
I
go
love
crazy.
when y'all's work, and I was like, do whatever you want. Fucking A.
Yeah, it was actually a really easy process. It was just a matter of her sending me a master, us encapsulating, sending some caps back to you, and she's like, go for it. So
Me being over the moon.
yeah, so it was super easy. Yeah.
I think you guys were kind of breaking new ground too. I remember that was one of the first sort of collabs that kind of happened, and I remember talking to you, and you're like, "Oh my God, I've ruined her brand." You're such a warrior, and there was just a lot of weight because I think they're both very. It's a very popular sculpt, and so there's a lot of pressure on you, and I think that kind of that realness sort of helped people kind of.
But the worry
engage
and
with it
like
just a bit more.
the perfectionism is what made it so wonderful.
But you guys were both worried. That's kind of the whole thing. It's like, yeah, so interesting.
And Marcus and Rob, you guys did a very popular one called the Cthulhu.
Yeah.
Tell us about that process.
I was hinting to Marcus before going to my first Seattle meetup that I really wanted to work with him, and I wanted to see what his process was about, and I thought we could work together on something. And he after meeting him, it makes total sense, but he goes, oh, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out.
I'm not about like itineraries and plans. I'm very, very free form. Alcohol kind of informs a lot of things.
And the free form aspect of it was really what took hold when I went out to Portland and met up with him. From then on, we spent a week. Very early on, we nailed down what we wanted to accomplish. And
Really?
well,
Is there a bullet point list?
except it was more like I want to see this happen, and that first goal was always like a stepping stone goal, and that's how I felt like it worked in person.
Did you know that you were going to pick the two sculpts that you did?
I thought about it a lot before the event. And
There was months, I think, we were sort of just barely kind of like thinking on the idea of like, what do you do this, and it could be like tentacles, and it could be like sort of a thing, and then it sort of fell off the radar for a little bit, and then there was this opportunity to sort of get together and actually spend some time together.
So did you guys make it like at the Seattle?
No, it was in Portland.
Yeah.
They remember, and Robert had come out for like I think it was like 2 weeks, like 10 days, something like that.
Yeah.
And we just spent every day together, like making stuff, doing art things, and eating a ton of food.
We ate
Great.
so much.
Brunch
was incredible.
Yeah, your blog like went from keycaps to like food pictures. Like
Yeah.
every day, people were like, "Dude, are you even making keycaps anymore?" But yeah, it's a lifestyle exercise, and the keycap came out of it sort of at the end.
Yeah, I mean, everything was incredibly accommodating, and I think the contrast between, say, Kudos and Kate's remote is that they had this exchange of ideas that was more unspoken and built on trust, and we built trust through pure exposure to one another and just kind of being in each other's hair for a certain period of time. There were points where I really wanted to say, is this good enough? And Marcus was there to say, yeah.
Let's have another drink.
It's all about keeping it light. You know, you gotta keep it light, and have a drink, make sure you're relaxed.
Yeah.
Just let it do its thing organically.
And I feel as though it's like having he is the funkiest studator. Is that like how you call a student mentor? Somebody that works with you learns everything that you're working on without really having to be instructed, and then teaches you something new as a result. All at the same time. So it was brilliant. That's what it was like for me.
No, it was, I think for me, like, I'm pretty laid back, and I'm all about like just being easy and like not being like this crazy thing, and just sort of letting it have its flow, and that's kind of the opposite of how we work. That's okay though, because I think, spending 10 days together, there was so much exchange of like, here's how we produce stuff, and here's how we do molds, and besides the sculpture, and that's kind of best practices.
The process.
Shared.
The process.
The process is informed so much. Like honestly, all of the marbling and all of the stuff we're doing nowadays, like color-wise, a lot of it is because of the ingredients that sort of Binge brought to that collaboration. Super interesting stuff. It opened entire new windows. And
Awesome.
it was great.
Fantastic.
Totally a positive experience.
Switching topics. So one of the things that I know, like when I first met you guys, I asked you, but I'm sure others would love to hear, is what do you like to collect in terms of artisans or artists and stuff like that, and what sculpts, makers, and why, and what you like about it. So I'll start with perhaps Kate.
Oh man. I don't know. The new stuff I've collected has been like Wild Story Rachel, a couple of people who I feel like are passionate and talented. I am drawn towards. Like, if you don't have clean shots, it's because you don't care enough to have clean shots. Like, if you don't have a clean sculpt, it's because you don't care enough to have a clean sculpt. So when I find someone who's like a clean sculpt, clean shots, clean cap, like, you can obviously see their love like in the cap thing. I'm into it. So
Their passion.
yeah, the passion shines through. Always. I don't know. So anyone who's like passionate and influencer stuff, I usually try to be involved with, or like get their caps or join in, and give them like.
Wild Story caps are amazing.
Yeah, they're so
Out of
good.
nowhere. Yes, amazing stuff.
Can you be my
And
friend?
continents away.
But very much in touch with like the community and things that are very much.
Yeah.
Like, her caps are so small and detailed and tiny, and like every hair, every strand, everything is like colored and like pays attention, and I appreciate
So
it.
much character.
For sure.
Drew, say particular one that comes to mind?
Well, the problem with a maker telling people what caps to
I know.
everybody tends
I
to
know.
like hoard them
What-
all and then be like, hey, I got this, you
what-
want to trade?
Yeah. If you don't want to.
No. Like, I mean, personally, I collect plaque.
Yeah.
I always collect plaque.
No one here does.
Leaves.
Who is that?
Leaves in particular, but the amount of leaves in circulation nowadays is so tough. I've been sitting on the same 12 like forever now.
There's another panelist that might have a few.
One or two.
What is it you like about it? Because that in particular is an interesting one, right? It's not quite a sculpt.
It's not quite a sculpt. It's much easier to take a blank and add to it than it is to take a blank and etch into it and make it clean. And the fact that that's executed so almost like it's machined, and then it opens up possibilities for infill. It matches profiles. It just goes with everything. It's simple. It's sophisticated. So a lot of respect.
It's OG.
It's OG.
Too, like, because it's OG, everyone knows like this is what you should get and collect.
Yeah.
You know?
What about you, Marcus? I know you like that one too.
We're the same. Yeah, we compete against each other all the time for collecting those. But that's kind of the same thing. It's like a history component, you know, being like the first maker and just like doing the stuff better than we're doing it like today. But just so good and so understated. And it was never a thing. And it was just like, you know, I'm not putting this cap out there for $300. I'm putting it out there for like $15.
Right.
And it was amazing and beautiful colors. And there's just so much I don't know, there's just so much depth to it. But that's kind of what I collect. It's kind of like, you know, sculpts are transient, but blanks are forever. I mean, that's kind of thing. Even though it's only a profile, it still sort of matches that R4. But it just, I'm all about simple for like my own stuff. I want something that I can see every single day. And although I like kind of character and like good, really interesting caps, like bright colors and sort of whatnot, the daily drivers are just super basic. Just something that you can live with every single day. It doesn't live, I mean, mine currently live in a box, but I like to actually use it. I have them on my boards and I just will exchange it. But sculpts don't always work for that all the time. It's a much more like intense flavor thing. So subtlety is my thing.
I mean, for the usual collector, you know, if you're new and you look at a claque, it's not a big deal. It's just a skull, it's just a leaf. But the fact that it's as clean as it is, and it looks as good as it is, and it came out when it came out, you know. By today's standards, you're like, okay, yeah, whatever, it's a skull, whatever. But back then, it was like
2014, earlier?
The original
2009?
Yeah, the original black skull.
Well, there's also like the extreme rare.
I should listen to the Artisan History podcast.
I mean, it's so ahead of its time. It was like having an iPhone during the Civil War. It was just like so ahead of its
Well, it's
time.
like it's so defining. You know, we are here because of that.
Yeah.
I think.
I mean, like, simplicity is so hard. Everyone's like, oh, it's so simple, it's just a skull. It's like, no, but like the simplicity of it is very difficult to achieve. Like, there are 10, 20, 50 skulls now, but like no one is as iconic as the original skull because it's very hard to do minimalist, but also like iconic and good.
A3 does it very well.
Love
Big.
It's just deceptively simple.
I'm actually super lucky to know most of these guys here on a personal level, and every keycap that I've collected has been either just like a buy of opportunity. You know, I went in on their sales and I won, or I berated them in person. And I tried to keep it not so weird and ask them all the time for their stuff. So my collection's, it's pretty, I feel like it's modest. I probably have, between all of what I like to call my friends' collection is like 40 to 50 caps total.
Modest.
Yeah.
But that goes back all the way to like Nubbinator, who I honestly wish he could be talking here. That's just.
I don't think he'd be too happy right now.
Well, yeah, but still.
But
Gotta take the good with the
As long as
bad.
there's beer, it'll be okay.
I would love for him to say a thing or two about Artisans, and then appreciate his work that much more.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, he can.
It's you get to see these guys in person sometimes. Like I got to work with Marcus. I've seen Kudos three times now. And Kate, I've been meeting since, was it 2015?
It's been a minute.
Yeah. their personality really comes through in their work, and so I'd be lucky to own a cap from any of them, any one of them.
Aw, show your face.
All right, so this is a bit of a cheesy one, but I'll ask it anyway. So, in terms of inspiration, right? And I know this can come from anywhere as an artist, music that you're listening to, paintings, whatever. But when you're thinking about a new sculpt, because a new sculpt is a big deal, at least to us. Like when you guys release something new, it's a kind of a big occasion. What goes into the process of that for you guys? Is it an evolutionary thing? Is it something that's kind of like a spur of the moment inspiration?
Dad jokes. Popsy skull, the meat Popsy skull. Oh gosh, that was entirely Fifth Element driven, by the way. Bruce Willis is up against the wall. I am a meat popsicle. He's talking to the officers.
Yeah, that's Binge's whole shtick right there.
A lot of puns.
Dad jokes and puns.
Kudos?
I mean, I'm sure I can probably speak for you guys as well, but for every sculpt that actually makes it out there that's ever casted, there's probably like 10 that you've already sculpted a million times that never made the cut. So for me, a lot of the stuff that I sculpt just comes from stuff that I've drawn since I was a kid, over and over again. And eventually I'm like, holy crap, I look at some old sketchbooks and I'm like, this can actually fit on a cat. Like buttholes. Like buttholes. I've been staring at buttholes my whole life. I finally brought that to fruition. So for me, it's not like I get from point A to point B, and it's not step 1 through 10. It's more like I just throw stuff against the wall until something sticks, essentially.
Marcus, something similar?
I'm gonna agree with that. Like, I'll have dedicated times, but it's like I might have a very, very vague idea of like how to sort of achieve kind of in the end. But the thing with Artisans for me in casting and sculpting is you kind of have to surprise yourself, because that's like that little endorphin rush that you get. Like when you're casting model caps, you have no idea if it's going to just turn out like complete ass or it's going to be amazing until you open it. And when you open it, you're like, oh my god, this is so fucking cool. And like you have to get that same sort of excitement, because we're sort of like divorced from like the excitement that you all get, like by getting the caps. Like, what am I going to get in the
Well, you've lived it for a while before it comes out.
Right, but it's like we don't really have that opportunity anymore, so I have to kind of take that for myself. So that's sort of like sculpts as well. It's like you dedicate a time to work on a thing, you work on it, and it starts kind of showing itself. You're like, oh, that's really cool, and then you just keep working it. But I think there has to be that element of randomness where you let it do its thing, and then you enhance what's kind of sort of there. You just, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Mostly it doesn't, but sometimes it does.
Mostly it doesn't.
Yeah, but when it doesn't work, we get CIFU caps.
Well, yeah, there's that. And then, like, the beauty of it is Kirsten and I work together too, so it's like I'll be at a stopping point, and then I'll be like, okay, you need to work on this now. Like, you need to do it.
Hand it up.
So she'll do it, and it'll completely change. Like, that's what Zuka was. Like, it was totally different at the beginning, and then it came back to me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. It's like a fucking blowfish. It's like, so it's like, when you see it, but you can get excited, and like that's kind of the thing. It's like you have to create opportunities for yourself to get excited about the work. And I think if you're excited about it, it's going to be good. It's sort of like what Kate was saying kind of earlier on. You can see people that are really passionate and into the work. You can see that excitement kind of go through the craftsmanship. You want it to turn out really well. So that's kind of what it is for me. I know that's fake.
No, and Kate, you've had a couple of relatively recent new sculpts, Amelia, and that's gone through a couple of iterations.
Well, my new sculpts are like V2 of old sculpts. It's really hard to think of like a new thing that's going to be iconic. It's much easier to revisit like an old idea that might work well. I mean, the whole time you're trying to like meet a medium between self-satisfaction and pleasing a community. So you're like trying to find something that's cool, but also find something that you enjoy making. So it's like, it can be a slow process.
Absolutely.
So on the flip side, right, on the flip side of that, retirement of sculpts. When do you guys decide, hey, is it I've just done enough and I'm sick of this mold, the mold broke and I can't make any more, unfortunately. What's the time at which you guys feel like it's time to retire, or is there, again, it's more nebulous and transitory, it never fully retires, it just reduces gradually.
I'm never gonna lose sleep over a cast again. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's my rule. If I feel like the work in bringing things back up to a production level is going to make me lose sleep while I have something on my plate, it's just better left either iterated upon in the future or set to rest.
So meaning when you're just, when it stresses you out to think about scaling that sculpt again?
I think, no, I'm actually just talking about physically preventing me from sleeping. If it's going to eat up my 2 to 4 a.m. time slot when I could be really getting into it,
Yeah.
sawing logs, no, I have to put a stop and take, other priorities into consideration.
Sure. So
Yeah.
got it.
I feel like sculpts are a slippery slope because sometimes you're like super fed up and you hate this and you hate this cast and you hate this sculpt. You don't want to fuck with it ever again. But then like 6 months down the road, maybe you want to revisit and you want to try it again.
Sure.
So I try not to
Nothing's
make
ever really-
any
Nothing's ever really
absolutes.
retired,
Yeah, like I'll never ever sell this cast
It's on a
again. Like, no,
hiatus.
I might like it again and like sell it in 6 months. Like,
Sure.
I don't know. It's like a evolutionary thing.
For me, there's my process. I mean, when we think about casting, we think about the entire process as one process, but you go from conceptualizing to sculpting to prototyping, and it looks great, and you're good to go. And then you try casting it, and you're like, fuck, why did I do this? So you start this brand new challenge as soon as that cap is ready. You make the production molds and you're like, well, I've gone ahead and I've committed at this point. So for me, casting it is actually, you set yourself, for me, I set benchmarks. Once I reach a point where it no longer challenges me, I'm just over it. So I just want to move on to another
How
thing.
fast does that happen for you though?
Pretty
I think faster than most of us.
No, I mean like, just look at the onslaught.
Is it like a coding thing for you? Like you'll
at my
you'll achieve what you want.
The thing is, it's like if you're not challenging yourself, what happens is while you're casting, you get into this autopilot mode, and then you don't care.
Autopilot's
I feel like you're
dangerous.
bad about like constantly not good enough. Like I've got to make something better.
Yeah,
I've gotta make something
and then you'll
cooler.
find
I've gotta make
yourself
something more
while
intimate.
you're casting to want to improve on it, and you're like,
Yeah.
you know what? Like, I'm just better off just destroying it and just moving on
Yeah.
rather than
I
improving.
think there's something to be said with sticking with it though, because like it's sometimes it forces you to like do new stuff. Man.
Sure.
Like, that's kind of like where Marvel came from.
Yeah,
like
find
normally
inspiration,
you-
new inspiration.
Yeah,
out of
or like
yourself.
resin writing or any of that. It's like how do you keep doing the same thing every fucking day for like 2 years? And keep it new and interesting
Exactly.
for people, because it's just like I'm a big fan of the community will let you know if you're selling stuff for too high of a price.
But also
if you're making
fuck the
too
community.
Absolutely. But at the same time, I
Make
know
things
it's
you
kind of
like, sell them for your
collaborative.
hourly rate and get over it.
Yeah.
Like, I have a real job. If I spent 4 hours doing this, I would sell it for this price. Like,
Yeah, no, I think there absolutely
Real
has to
job.
be. There has
it's a real job.
It is. I'm so happy for you.
I mean, I think it requires a certain level of passion to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And if you're doing it just to make people happy, if you're just providing fan service, you're eventually going to burn out.
Yeah, you gotta have your
So
own
you
service.
have to like keep cranking out new stuff. If you're unhappy with something, by all means, retire it, move on. It's if anything for your own sanity.
But if it makes you happy, who cares if you've had a sculpt out for like 2-3 years? Honestly, that's a sign that you're still in something that could open up a new door for you.
I think if you like it, other people will like it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it translates.
It's
You're
kind of what it is.
satisfied.
If you're into it, you're excited about it, and you can do this thing, and you're just like, that's fucking cool. Like somebody else will share that sentiment.
Exactly. Can you insist?
Oh, I think like what Kate was saying earlier, if somebody's passionate about something, it doesn't really matter what it is, it translates into the work. You can tell that they're excited, and like he was saying, you find
You
new
get
ways
further
of
accidentally than you
stimulating
do
yourself.
trying.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, as someone who wishes I could have a job as an an artist, one of the best things is you guys can decide, right, when you're
I don't
kind
have
of
a job as an artist. I work.
who gets to be an artist, right, and actually do cool stuff. But you guys can decide, like, you know, I can't choose not to do my job and switch to I can quit. I'll literally have to quit my work and go somewhere else.
But if it's your passion, there's like that whole disconnect between if I
Yeah.
quit, then it's like love, passion, art versus like a paycheck.
Right, right,
So
right,
you don't
right.
just like drop
Fair,
it like it's
fair.
nothing. It's very different. I don't know.
Sorry.
How dare you?
I know.
All right.
I love you.
You guys enjoy.
Marcus, you mentioned handing off, and I didn't realize that Kristen helped back in food release, but
Yeah.
all great artists have, you know, either, you know, a muse, a significant other, a partner in business that helps them behind the scenes or up front. I think many of you might, but why don't you guys tell us from your perspective, like who your significant other is and how they may have helped you or, you know, otherwise inspire you or support you or whatever it is. Marcus?
Well, Carson is exactly 50% of Nightcaps, like in every possible aspect, whether it's sales, whether it's maybe not interacting with the community so much.
she does manage the social stuff, right?
But yeah, she does Instagram, you know, but it's like, I think we have a really, really super solid balance and it works really well. And there's certain things that she'll be better at and there's certain things that I will be better at. She's got a much, much steadier hand than I do. So there's that. But I feel like, you know, my color sense might be a little better. But I don't know. So you know, we have
Nobody's recording,
the
right?
skill sets complement each other, and you know, she might not be as visible to like the community and like the marketing sort of part of it, but absolutely 50% of everything.
You heard it there.
We see her hands a lot.
Yeah.
Emma.
Yeah.
Fabulous nails.
She has nice hands. It's that argument, you know, every day.
Kudos, this is your time in front of your significant other. Say whatever you want.
Pressure's on. The big pressure's on. Well, I started with Key Collective, and Koala has always been 50% of that. I mean, if going back on even all my recent colorways, I would say the best ones or the most popular ones have always been colorways that she either asked for or really liked. She was casting with me, but she's expecting now, so she's not allowed in the lab. But it's still, like, I would say she's still like that very last step before I post that photo. I will always show her every cap, and if she hates it, I might just put it in a cup and not ever show it. So she still has that final veto power. But you know, when you're making caps, sometimes it's really easy to tunnel vision, so it helps to have that outside feedback. And for me, she's kind of like a balance to that. So even though she's not very active in the lab now, I would still like to think that final product has a bit of her in it as well. So
Rob?
I don't do anything. This is the big reveal. Amber is amazing. So the way that we started working together really formulated during 4x4 because Amber wanted to be part of Hungerworks Studio more and more and more and more, and it's been a constant teaching experience. When I started, she was not involved at all. She wanted nothing to do with it. And then I got her doing package art. And some people can remember the old envelopes. And she would just help. And the first thing that I told her to do was draw whatever you're thinking, 5 minutes, that's all the time you have, go. And
It's good art exercise.
yeah, and she would be like, I hate this, and I'm like, yeah, well, it's going out because you put the ink there, and I think it's a cat, right? She's like, yeah, it's supposed to be a cat. I'm like, what do you mean? I recognize it as a cat. It's going out. So we have arguments like that every single day. Going to 4x4, I gave her a job, but she took that job and transformed it into a whole new way that we approach our work. And the task that I gave her was, I understand color, but I want you to understand the science behind the materials we're using for our color. I want you to measure everything, take down every single note about every piece of color that we make, every pigment, every filler, and she did it and made a big catalog of how it all works. And
You know that's not helpful.
I mean, you're breathing resin fumes. It's not healthy.
it's not, that's not healthy. And yeah, so she became really involved in color, but that changed how we treat our resin, how we work in our molds, the time frames that we work throughout the day. She brought a lot of her own personal strengths that I have no strength in. Scheduling was a big one, so we can wake up and 7 in the morning until 7 in the evening, or 11 to 11, or basically any 12-hour period. And within that time, knock out everything from maintaining the house to taking care of our dogs, to switching between various tasks, whether it's a casting task or photography. Everybody here does.
And that's a high, switching cost is high, because you can't just like easily switch back and forth between them, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's you're on a timer, and just saying I'm gonna put X amount of time, or no, we're gonna cast, so there's a window here in the day, so Amber can go out and do a 3.5-mile hike with the dogs, and then get back, take a shower, immediately do this, and I will have caught us up on our taxes. Like it's all very organized now. Yeah.
You have to pay taxes as an artisan. It's part of the thing.
The whole
LLC.
I can't really say it's like a 50-50. We act entirely as one cohesive unit at this point. I couldn't do 100% of the work without her in the scale, volume, or quality that we're able to accomplish now.
Unlike these guys, I've had so many relationships through the hobby, and I don't know, like it's weird to be with someone who understands and like helps and supports and tries to ship and like help you with stuff, versus being with someone who's like, what the fuck? It's really weird. So it's like, I don't know, I'm trying to find that balance. Like, I've had people who like I've dated and they help me ship and help me like do things, but at the end of the day, like I feel like it's all just me, which is weird because like if I date someone for like a year, they like want a stake and like, oh, I helped you ship, I helped you with this. I'm like, nah, dude, my sculpt, my cast, my fucking everything, like fuck off.
You volunteered.
Yeah, I was like, you were here for 1 out of 1/5 of my duration. But I don't know, like it's nice to have like the encouragement of another person. At the same time, like I've never had a relationship with someone where I'm like, oh, you inspire me for a sculpt, you inspire me for this. I'm just like, I'm gonna make this and you can help me if you want to. It's just, I don't know.
It's true direction.
Different. Yeah. Like you can help me fucking nail.
Who needs consensus?
I don't know. At the end of the day, like, I just want to make things that I like and give them to people that appreciate them. Like, I don't care. I just want to make things that are like cute and wonderful that people appreciate. And I want people to think they're cute and wonderful. And I'm like, if I can get that to you and make it, then we're good.
We love you,
Someone helps me.
Okay at best.
If someone helps me, cool. If someone doesn't help me, cool. Like, I'm still gonna do it either way.
So independent.
So switching gears a little bit from the art to the hobby in general. I started a couple years ago, and I've seen what, on the surface at least appears to be lots of changes. You guys have been in it longer than I have. What changes or significant things that have kind of changed over the last few years that you guys have noticed, either in terms of kind of art production or the business itself?
Would anybody in this room with a Dolce colored key set raise their hand? Okay, this the number of hands raised at a meetup, say 2-3 years ago, would have been double that. There's more than that. Okay, there are so many choices in the community now. That's the largest thing that I've seen.
Every possible color combination you say.
Yeah, and it's all at the fingertips of designers, and production companies are more willing to work with us. There's so many more choices, and so sometimes you know, the experience doesn't quite translate. But that's what makes the meetup so amazing, because there may be experiences that I would have on a desk that I would never have just right in front of me. And you got this wonderful person sitting there going, I made this, let me tell you all about it. So that part hasn't changed, but the amount there is to discover has only gotten wider. There's just more breadth to it. I'm passing.
Kudos, how about you? You've been through two brands now, the two hobbies. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of changes nowadays, in particular with artisans. I mean, there's a lot of makers now. I feel like when I started, we got to get away with a lot more stuff. You can like put out some pretty janky stuff, and for the most part, people, I mean, you didn't have much of a choice. It was like 1 out of 10 makers, so it's just like, this is great. They're not going to complain to you. I mean, there's like a handmade aspect of it that everybody kind of accepted. Nowadays, I feel like if you want to start, it's way harder. It's way harder to make a name for yourself because number one, there's a lot more makers, and number two, you know, you put out a new cap and people are expecting like almost factory quality, like shots and stuff like that. So I really feel bad for a lot of the new makers who have to come in and like really kind of claw their way to the top.
Yeah.
And also, you know, as people put out more sculpts, your options start decreasing, right? You know,
Originality is harder.
Exactly, like for somebody like Clack, the world is his oyster. You can start with a skull. No one's stepping on any toes with skulls back then. But now it's just like you see another skull. It's like the 7th iteration of the same thing. So
we have 2 makers right now that want to release umbrella-based keys. And they're totally cool with it, and they're just like, my umbrella is going to have 3 spokes, and yours is going to have 4. And so it's getting to be like a shared space. Would you say?
Right, and it's like there's a whole new language that has to like happen. There's a you know, because you could get by like 2 years ago, and I would never have to talk to these guys if I didn't want to. But you're at a place now where you will inevitably
can't ignore
step
each
a
other.
little bit.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. You can't ignore it anymore. You're in a shared space. You have to. There has to be some level of engagement.
Sure.
And keeping abreast of sort of what people are doing, because you know, I don't think any of us really want to actively go out and like kind of, you know, piss on somebody else. Or
We're not
something.
doing something that's just like ours.
Yeah, it's like, you know, people just want to do what they're interested in, but I think part of that now is you have to be kind of at least somewhat abreast of what's going on in the community as far as like new makers and new artisans. And I mean, we w're just talking about this last night where, you know, 2-3 years ago, you'd be lucky if you had 1 sale a month, and now we have upwards of 5-6 a day sometimes with new makers. And there's really cool stuff out there, and people doing all kinds of different things. But, you know, to me, that's just sort of one of those things where there's so many opportunities for people to get what they want, and that's great.
The fear of missing out, FOMO is less.
It's very, but it is very FOMO still, though. You know. You live die by FOMO. I mean, that's what it is, though. You know, we're in a limited quantity environment, limited time. But that's what keeps it engaging. You know, I think for me, for you, everybody.
Sitting every day at Keycon, just waiting for the link.
F5, baby. You know,
yeah,
and write those scripts.
And when we started, it was pretty much Geek Hack or Reddit. You know, now with the advent of Slack, Discord, it's instant gratification all the time. When is the next sale? Flash sale 1 minute. Like, it's so fast now that like, I feel like a lot of it's lost in translation. You know, there's something to be said about a really nice, long, heartfelt message that you get on a Geek Hack message versus like you jumping into a chat and like 15 people working, like just piling on top. So, in a way, people have gotten closer, but that closeness has also created fragments in the community. Whereas it used to be one forum where everybody's like, you know, we'll like coexist together. I might not really like you a whole lot, but now it's just fragments upon fragments, and it's kind of sad. And also it makes it really hard as even like a key set designer or keyboard designer or even a maker to like reach everybody, and you know, like you get messages and you can't respond to all of them, and you feel bad about
You
it.
get what you guys have, like people by reach out on Instagram, Keycon.
Yeah, and there's also like
Discord.
so many different platforms to like
You have to
run
work
sales.
really hard to not exist in the echo chamber either
Mhm.
because of that, because I think there's so many opportunities for connecting with people and everybody having their own sort of safe space where they're sort of immune from criticism and those kind of things, where it's like improper.
Mhm.
And it's really hard sometimes to get like an actual like read on like what people are sort of thinking because you don't, yeah. you
What do
just
they
don't-
honestly think without
Exactly,
worrying about that?
exactly, and not worrying about whether they're gonna get banned or
Right,
sort of
right.
whatever, and it's like, that's exceedingly difficult to find now, I think, so.
We need an anonymous Discord where we can trash talk the shit out of you.
Yeah, well, not really, but like maybe everybody's anonymous, and there is no like red people's names. And,
If you dox yourself or anybody else,
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
find you.
Challenge for artists.
Okay, we were asking how you guys have seen the hobby change over the years. Any particular thing because you've been in it for a while too now. Right?
Yeah, well, I don't know, like, first of all, there's so many artisans now.
Mhm.
It's nuts. That's about it.
So on that
It's just
topic,
like customs with artisans is like so new constantly. I'm like, I go to a meetup and I'm like, I know like the base 10
Yeah.
artisans and then base 10 like custom keyboards.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
holy shit, there's like 50 custom keyboards, 50 new artisans. Like people are like, oh, I follow you on Instagram. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know. It's not like, I don't know, it's just there's so many, and I love it. I love that people are making things. I love that people feel encouraged and artistic from the community. Like, I love it. But also, I'm just like, I can't keep up. But at the same time, I have friends that like years ago, like, I've lifelong friends who I've like been to their weddings. I've been friends with them forever. So it's like a weird juxtaposition of like new and old people and stuff.
So do you think that the market can sustain this volume? Is it? I was going to get a chart to show you kind of the subscriber growth on Mech Market. If you guys look at Reddit stats, you can see it's literally a hockey stick, right? I
Yeah.
started in 2017. There was something like 20,000 subscribers, and now we're hitting 2.5 years, right?
Well, I was saying the bubble will bust 4 years ago. So I have no predictions on the economy. I thought it would be dead like ages ago.
And a lot of the new makers, some of them are talking about going full time. And you guys took a while to get to part time to full time, right? And not all of you are full time yet. Do you think that new makers trying to say that they're planning to go full time is realistic? Is it sustainable? Or what's your
The
thoughts?
community will let you know if you're ready to go full time.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like any other job. You go, today I'm gonna go to that burrito place I love, and they're gonna teach me how to roll the best damn burrito ever, and I'm gonna be a model burrito slanging machine. And you do it. You go out and you do it. And you commit to it. The only thing that I worry about is if people realize what kind of a commitment it is to get most of your life in the mail and experience most of the relationships you're going to experience through the mail. That was kind of a weird thing, and it's got so many facets to it. As for whether the market's sustainable for that kind of volume of product, like I'm with Kate, I have no clue, but I will continue to do what I can to exist in the space.
I think it's sustainable. It's just like, for me, like I have a job that I enjoy, that I like, that I make money from. So it's like, Keycaps is like extra money.
Yeah.
It's nice. It's fun. It's like I came to New York because I sold Keycaps and I can afford it, you know. But it's not like a job. But I think it would be sustainable. But at the same time, like I don't want it to be sustainable. I want it to be something I just like enjoy to do. So I don't know. Like the market will definitely sustain artisans, and like you can start making keycaps tomorrow, and you can probably sell them enough for a living. Like the way it has expanded in the last couple of years, like anyone can make anything and like make it sustainable. But it's like art. Like, do you appreciate the artistry? Do you appreciate the time and the mental capacity and everything that goes into it versus do you appreciate like a 3D printed mold hobby and paste it? I don't know. I think it's up to the community to decide what is good and what is valuable. And everyone can fucking make a living off if they want to. I don't know. easy.
How dirty do you want to get those hands?
Yeah.
When
How
you-
black
I
should
mean,
your
you,
fingers?
when did you go full time?
I don't really know, honestly. Like maybe a year and a half ago. It was just sort of one of those things where like one thing eclipses the other thing. I mean, I've kind of been like, I know I've said this before at different like meetups and things like that, but I kind of had a little bit of a leg up, just doing my own business, doing contracting work and architectural work and those kind of things. And it wasn't a super hard shift to like go from working as a computer design.
It wasn't dramatic.
Yeah, it was just sort of this natural thing, and one kind of eventually sort of eclipsed the other. One was more interesting than the other, sort of thing. But as far as the market goes, it's. I mean, that's a completely different thing. It's like you have making on one side of it, and then you have the market on the other side of it. But it's like a codependent thing. Like we are only one half of that coin. And so, one thing that was really interesting to me, I was talking to Kyle from Keyforge, I think, at the Nightcaps meetup, and we were like, man, this is, the Seattle meetup last year was like 40 people, like this community college, and it was like really bad lighting, and it was just like morose, and just kind of this weird sort of vibe, and then all of a sudden it just kind of exploded and became this thing, and then there was NorCal like this, and the community just exponentially grew, and talking to Kyle, we're just like, man, is this like kind of plateauing? It's like, no, dude, we're like at the beginning.
I think we're at the beginning.
It's like it's only up from here, and it's just, but that brings all kind of new considerations, and you have to sort of evolve in your sort of thinking, and it really is a different space, and I think it kind of goes back to what you're saying. There's a lot you could get away with sort of back in the day when we were just sort of pioneering these things and like kind of making stuff and like trying to colorways, and now there's definitely like this very high expectation, and you have to kind of set that for yourself and deliver it.
And as a new maker, then therefore it's a lot more challenging because it's 0 to 100 in the first sale. Right?
Exactly.
So we have a few more minutes. I thought I'd turn it over to see if there are any questions in the crowd. Go ahead.
Do you feel that artisans in the future are going to stay based in a lot of the more traditional techniques and styles that we see now, or is there going to be a lot more innovation, sort of like with now people are making modular artisans, like with the Kudos 3?
I think we're only going to see more of that. I think the more people get into it, the more expertise is brought to bear on this medium, which is just like this universal thing. All you need to do is get it to fit on an MX step. That's like literally your only criteria besides size. And it, 12% not real. It's a beautiful medium, and I think there's so much skills that can be sort of brought to that field, and like people that are into injection molding, people that are doing like materials integration, and just so much
other things they can bring from outside the house.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be resin. It's just there's so much that can be. We're like in this transitional zone. I think we're only going to see more of that, and it's going to be more interesting. And what we're doing here is like kind of a niche, sort of like this handmade thing, and I think we're going to see more evolution of the kind of semi-limited manufacture stuff that's like kind of super well crafted, and not just 3D printed, but we're kind of already seeing a little bit of it now, like coming from China, and it's so interesting to me, like how specific the stuff gets. Well, Keith is just doing what we're doing. He's just skipping a step. Yeah. But, yeah, exactly, right? Like there's a lot of new makers out there that are doing something in a completely different process. They're not like mixing A and B together and dyes. They're just approaching it a different way, and that's super interesting to me.
I think it's interesting to see the makers that are coming out where it's a group of them and they each have disciplines, like our key, right?
Yeah, our
Like
key, it's
master
like a
and sculptor,
collaboration.
right?
Every key is a collaboration, and like
Yeah.
that's super interesting.
So how do you guys really determine like your sale methods? Like Marcus, he does like Poison Summer where he has a sale every single day without fail. And then you have like Kudos, who is like once in a blue moon does...
You have sales Kudos?
No, he does not.
No.
Behind many walls.
Yeah.
Don't ask, don't tell.
No, that's a good question, right? So there's so many different sale methods too that have exploded, right? Channels, types, et cetera, et cetera. How do you guys decide?
I think sale format needs to be dictated by process. If I can make 100 caps a day and spend 3 hours casting it, you'd be seeing huge raffles. If I make 5 caps a day, sitting for 12 to 15 hours, yeah, I'm probably going to sell to like a handful of people and not really make it out for the open, because at the end of the day, I need to do something that's worthwhile for me. So for me to do a mass scale sale with the amount that I yield, it doesn't even make sense.
Economically.
So I think sale format needs to reflect methods of production, essentially.
And then there's also the question, which is, and Marcus, you were born in this, right? Like the fairness, quote unquote, right?
What's fair?
What's fair, right?
Somebody has to get fucked for you to get that.
Right. I'm gonna quote that. That's great. But it's tough, right? And the community's grown, and it's not like there's 10 more Marcuses or 10 more Kudos, right? Like there's a
But
lot
there
more
is
people.
to an extent, though. I mean, because somebody can get really frustrated from Clackvent, and they can just be like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna go buy the Post Summit cap," and if
Right,
they get
right.
fucked on that,
You have
then they can go to
options.
someone
You
else.
didn't have
Yeah.
that before, right?
Whereas, because you'd have people come in and they would like lose Clackvent, and they would lose it, delete their account, you'd never see it again. Maybe 2 years later they come back and go, "Oh, maybe I'm kind of collecting again."
It was a fake account anyway.
I don't know what's the balance. Like I just kind of look at everything like every sale you do is a collaborative effort between you and the community. Because you've already made these caps, they're cool, and you've done them. But now it's time to like make it interesting. Like what's interesting? What do people sort of want? Is it exciting for there to be only one of 3? Fuck yeah! It's like if you made like 3,000 or something, yeah, that's cool, and you can do group buys, and those are fun to a certain extent, but it's really exciting to have like that chance at something really limited. I love participating in it, and so do you all. So that's kind of the thing. It's exciting, it's engaging, and you get to feel that little dopamine hit. If you get an invoice. I don't know. I mean, we're all kind of there, right? But I think it's a collaborative. That's kind of what determines it. What's fun for everybody else, what's fun for us. But it is, what can you make in a day that's fun and satisfying for you to do, I think.
I mean, 2 years ago, I was making G Collective caps. I made 150. Made sure I sent one to everybody. Wrote posts about distribution and what probability looks like, and really bent over
But your
backwards to
sales
make
have really
everybody
evolved.
happy.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I wasn't happy.
And nobody else was either.
Yeah, no,
I started
no
making
one
caps
else
because of that.
And you have to get to a point where it's just like, okay, well, how do I continue being in this hobby without having any type of resentment?
Yeah.
So
You gotta find the
for me, I wanted to focus on my art. I wanted to push the boundaries, and unfortunately, that takes a lot of time. That yields very few. So it has to reflect basically your method of production. It has to make sense for each maker. Yeah.
Rob, do you recommend fulfillment sales?
Yes, do it if you're new to the game. If you're brand new to casting, I would say, let people tell you how much you should make, and make that viable, and
Never get the carrot before you can deliver your caps.
No, it's learning what that is. You don't really understand fulfillment until you do it, and then you can't ever gauge the expectation of fulfillment. And it's a lot more complex, especially leaving the work, because at the end of any given day during a fulfillment process, you're going to realize none of you're not done. That sucks. You go to like a job, usually everything's broken down into sustainable steps that you can disconnect from your work and then come back to it another day, start fresh. And when you're going to sleep and waking up still connected to it, you'll skip meals.
Sleep.
Yes, yeah, you'll
There's
sleep.
that weight of responsibility, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you need to keep pushing yourself to do it, and yeah.
But good question about fulfillment sales. Just start small. Don't try and like meet a superhero like Marcus and then be like, I can do superhero things like immediately
You gotta pay your
afterwards.
dues. You gotta pay your dues. You have to, you have to figure out how to get there and how to achieve it first and be consistent and have good customer service.
Any other questions from you guys? In the back?
Do you guys have any regrets?
Not anymore, sucker. Oh, sorry.
No regrets.
No
For
regret.
me, I don't have any regrets. I feel like this hobby has fulfilled so much that I didn't even know it would fulfill. So everything that comes is so positive.
Yeah,
Who
I
knew
mean-
someone would appreciate things that I make? Who knew someone would appreciate this? Who knew? I don't know.
How fulfilling is
Great.
that though? Like just meeting
Yeah.
that audience of people that are into your shit and they're just
It's
like,
nuts.
oh my god.
I'm
There's
a
something
graphic
that-
designer.
yeah.
Designer. I spend so much time like making stuff that people hate, and they're like, "No, change it, tweak it."
Or they're
make
just
this."
critical of it, and that's all they
So
are,
like to
yeah.
make something that I like and someone else to like, it's just like it's so nice. It feels really good because I make things people hate all the time. So.
I mean, a mistake's only a mistake if you don't learn from it. So even if you screw up, if you piss people off, if you make a sculpt that's impossible to cast and you put a lot into it, you could at least walk away and say, I shouldn't have done that. I know now for the future, so there's no really regrets there. So, oh, except for
Go for
Total
mods.
I took mine. I used for 5 years. I love them.
All right, we're at the hour. Thanks very much, guys. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.